So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. The Wrothgarian Mountains, ancient and unyielding, rise like the backs of slumbering titans along the northwestern spine of Tamriel. Their peaks, crowned with eternal snow, glimmer softly in the last light of dusk, while the valleys below are already surrendered to shadow. It is here, in the embrace of these formidable heights, that Orsinium stands, a city of stone and hope, carved by the hands of a people often misunderstood by the world beyond their walls. The Orsimer, known to outsiders as orcs, have called this place home for generations untold, their history woven into the very bedrock beneath their feet. As twilight deepens, a gentle mist begins to gather in the hollows, winding its way through the narrow passes and between the sturdy towers of Orsinium. The city itself is a marvel of perseverance and artistry. Massive walls, built from blocks of dark granite quarried from the mountains themselves, rise in layered terraces, each stone bearing the marks of countless hands and the scars of many rebuildings. For Orsinium has been razed and rebuilt more times than any other city in Tamriel, and yet, like its people, it endures, stronger, wiser, and more beautiful with every resurrection. The air is crisp and carries the scent of pine, smoke, and distant snow. From the highest ramparts, one can see the last rays of the sun painting the peaks in hues of rose and gold, while the valleys below are lost to a blue, velvety darkness. Within the city, life moves at a tranquil pace. The Orsimer are a people of deep voices and deeper hearts, their laughter resonant, their silences comfortable. They are gentle giants, broad of shoulder and strong of limb, yet their movements are careful, deliberate, as if mindful of the strength they wield. Beneath the shadow of the mountains, the city's heart is a great communal square, where the largest hearth in Orsinium burns day and night. Here, the clans gather in the evening, sharing stories, food, and warmth. The flames dance and crackle, casting flickering shadows on faces both young and old. Children listen wide-eyed to tales of ancient heroes and lost homelands, while elders nod in time with the rhythm of the fire, their memories stretching back to days when Orsinium was but a dream whispered on the wind. The Orsimer's reputation among other races is often one of savagery and brutality, but within these walls, a different truth is revealed. Here, there is music, deep, resonant chants that echo through the stone halls, and soft, lilting melodies played on bone flutes and hammered dulcimers. There is art, intricate carvings adorn doorways and lintels, telling stories in spirals and knots, while tapestries woven with mountain will depict scenes of peace and plenty. There is kindness, neighbors share what they have, and no one is left to face the cold alone. As night settles over Orsinium, the city glows with a gentle light. Lanterns, crafted from polished horn and filled with fragrant oil, hang from every doorway, casting a warm, golden glow on the cobblestones. The streets are quiet, save for the soft footfalls of the night watch as they make their rounds. These guardians, chosen for their wisdom as much as their strength, move with a calm assurance, their presence a comfort to those who sleep within the city's embrace. High above, the mountains keep their silent vigil. The wind whispers through the pines, carrying with it the distant call of a snow owl and the faint, haunting notes of an Orsimer lullaby. In the quiet of the night, the city seems to breathe, each exhale a sigh of contentment, each inhale a promise of endurance. The Orsimer have learned, through centuries of hardship and exile, that true strength lies not in the sword or the shield, but in the bonds of kinship and the courage to hope. In a modest home near the city's edge, a young Orsimer named Gorbash lies awake, listening to the sounds of Orsinium at rest. His thoughts drift like the mist outside his window, wandering through memories of his childhood, of lessons learned at his father's knee, of stories told by his mother as she wove baskets by the fire, of the first time he climbed the mountain path and saw the world spread out beneath him like a tapestry. He thinks of the mountains, their silent strength, and feels a kinship with the stone and snow. Elsewhere, in a forge that glows like a second sun, the master smith Sharon Gromack works late into the night. His hammer rises and falls in a steady rhythm, shaping iron into beauty. Each strike is a prayer, each spark a blessing. He hums an old song, one taught to him by his grandmother, and the melody weaves through the smoke and heat, soothing his tired muscles and filling the forge with peace. In the city's central hall, the wise woman Bazruga tends to a pot of herbal tea, her hands steady despite her age. She listens patiently to the worries of a young mother, offering words of comfort and wisdom drawn from a lifetime of watching the seasons turn. Her voice is soft, but carries the weight of mountains, and the young mother leaves with her heart eased and her spirit lighter. Throughout Orsinium, the gentle giants find solace in the routines of daily life. Some tend to the gardens hidden within the city's walls, coaxing flowers to bloom in defiance of the harsh mountain climate. Others care for the livestock, their hands gentle as they brush the thick coats of mountain goats and lead them to sheltered pastures. Still others gather in the library, where stone tablets record the history and lore of the Orsimer, each word a thread in the tapestry of their collective memory. As midnight approaches, the city grows still. The only sounds are the soft crackle of the hearth fires and the distant murmur of the river Carth as it winds its way past Orsinium's gates. The river's song is one of endurance, its waters having carved their path through stone and ice for ages beyond reckoning. Gorbash, unable to sleep, slips from his bed and makes his way to the riverbank. He sits in silence, listening to the water's gentle music, and feels the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. Above him, the stars wheel in their eternal dance, silent witnesses to the passage of time. The moon, full and bright, bathes the city in silver light, illuminating the faces of those who keep watch and those who dream. In this moment, all is calm, all is as it should be. Orsinium, the city of the gentle giants, sleeps in the shadow of the Wrothgarian peaks, secure in the knowledge that, come morning, they will rise again to greet the dawn with open hearts and steadfast hope. The mountains, ancient and unchanging, stand guard through the night, their peaks touched by starlight, their valleys cradling the dreams of the Orsimer. And so, in the shadow of the Wrothgarian peaks, the story of Orsinium continues, one of resilience, of unity, and of the gentle strength that endures when all else has fallen away. The first light of dawn crept over the jagged silhouette of the Wrothgarian Mountains, painting the world in gentle hues of rose and gold. Night's chill lingered in the valleys, where the mist still clung to the lower slopes. But on the heights above Orsinium, the sun's earliest rays touched the snowfields and set them aglow, as if the mountains themselves were waking from a long, silent slumber. The city, nestled in its stony cradle, began to stir beneath this new day, its towers and terraces catching the light and reflecting it in soft, shifting patterns across the stone. Within the sturdy walls of Orsinium, the Orsimer people greeted the dawn with a quiet reverence. For them, morning was not simply the beginning of another day, but a renewal, a chance to rise, to build, and to endure, as they always had. The city's great gates, fashioned from iron and oak, stood closed through the night, but as the sky brightened, they creaked open with a deep, sonorous groan. The sound echoed down the main thoroughfare, a slow and stately summons to the waking world. In the heart of the city, the communal hearths still glowed with the embers of last night's fire. Here, the first to rise were the bakers and the cooks, their hands practiced and sure as they kneaded dough and set pots to boil. The aroma of fresh bread mingled with the sharper scent of mountain herbs, drifting out into the cool morning air. Soon, the square would be alive with the gentle bustle of daily life. But for now, there was only the soft clatter of wooden spoons and the low murmur of voices greeting one another in the dawn. Gorbash, the young Orsimer who had spent the night in restless contemplation, was among the first to step outside. He paused on the threshold of his family's home, breathing in the crisp air and watching as the city slowly awakened. The rooftops glistened with dew, and the stone streets were slick and dark, but already the first rays of sunlight were creeping down the mountainside, illuminating the city's highest towers and casting long, golden shadows across the square. He made his way along the main road, his footsteps echoing softly in the stillness. As he walked, he passed neighbors and friends, each offering a nod or a quiet greeting. There was no rush in their movements, no sense of urgency or haste. The Orsimer understood the value of patience, the wisdom of beginning each day with intention. In their hearts, they carried the memory of mornings when Orsinium did not stand, when their people wandered, homeless and hunted, across the wilds of Tamriel. Each sunrise was a gift, and they honored it in their own quiet ways. At the city's edge, the old smith Sharn Gromak was already at work. His forge stood open to the morning air, and the first light of dawn caught the polished metal of his tools, making them shine like silver. Sharn's hands were scarred and strong, but his touch was gentle as he shaped the day's first blade. He worked in silence, save for the soft hum of an old Orsimer song, his voice blending with the sizzle of hot metal and the steady rhythm of the hammer. To Sharn, the act of creation was a form of prayer, a way to give thanks for another day, another chance to build and to endure. Elsewhere, the wise woman Bazruga moved among her garden beds, her steps slow and deliberate. She gathered fresh herbs for her morning tea, her fingers brushing the dew from each leaf. The garden was small but lush, a hidden oasis of green and color within the city's stone embrace. Bazruga paused for a moment, lifting her face to the sun, and whispered a blessing for her people, a wish for health, for peace, for the gentle strength that had carried them through so many trials. As the sun climbed higher, the city came fully to life. Children darted through the streets, their laughter ringing out like birdsong. Merchants opened their stalls, arranging their wares with care and pride. The scent of baking bread grew stronger, mingling with the tang of fresh-cut wood and the earthy aroma of tilled soil. Everywhere, there was the sense of a community waking together, each person a vital thread in the tapestry of Orsinium's life. The city's elders gathered in the central square, their voices low and measured as they discussed the day's business. They spoke of crops and weather, of repairs needed to the city's walls, of news from distant lands brought by passing traders. Their words were thoughtful, their decisions guided by years of experience and a deep love for their home. Among them sat the oldest of all, a woman whose hair was white as snow and whose eyes held the memory of many dawns. She listened more than she spoke, her presence a quiet anchor in the shifting currents of the morning. As the day unfolded, the light grew stronger, chasing away the last of the night's shadows. The mountains stood tall and proud above the city, their peaks gleaming in the sun. From the highest tower, a watchman sounded a horn, a clear, ringing note that echoed across the rooftops and out into the valleys beyond. It was a signal not of danger, but of welcome, a reminder to all who heard it that Orsinium stood strong and unbroken, a beacon of hope in the wilds of the north. Gorbash paused at the edge of the city, looking out across the rolling foothills and the distant forests. He felt the sun's warmth on his face, the steady thrum of life all around him. In that moment, he understood what it meant to belong, to be part of something greater than himself, to share in the daily miracle of survival and renewal. The first light over Orsinium was more than just the dawn of a new day. It was a promise, a silent vow that no matter what trials might come, the gentle giants of Orsinium would rise to meet them together. And so, beneath the watchful gaze of the mountains, the city welcomed the day. The Orsimer moved through their morning rituals with quiet grace, their hearts steady and strong. The sun climbed higher, casting its light over the stone walls and the green gardens, the bustling square and the silent forges. In every corner of Orsinium, there was life and hope, and the unyielding spirit of a people who had learned to greet each new dawn with gratitude and resolve. As the morning matured, the sun's golden beams poured down the slopes of the Wrothgarian Mountains, spilling into the city of Orsinium and bathing its sturdy walls in a gentle radiance. The peaks, ancient and immense, loomed protectively above the city, their snowy crowns gleaming in the light. It was as if the mountains themselves were reaching down in a silent gesture of comfort and folding Orsinium in their vast, unyielding arms. Gorbash, the young Orsimer, found himself drawn upward along a winding path that led from the city's edge into the lower foothills. The trail was old, its stones worn smooth by generations of feet. Warriors, artisans, children, and elders alike had walked here, seeking solace or inspiration in the mountain's embrace. As he climbed, the sounds of the waking city faded behind him, replaced by the hush of wind through pine and the occasional call of a distant hawk. The mountain air was brisk and clean, filling Gorbash's lungs with a cool clarity that sharpened his senses and soothed his mind. He paused often, resting his hand on the rough bark of ancient trees or stooping to examine a cluster of wildflowers blooming defiantly in the rocky soil. Each step upward felt like a journey not only through the landscape, but into the heart of his people's story, a story written in stone and snow, in the patient endurance of the Orsimer and the steadfast strength of the mountains themselves. From a high vantage, Gorbash looked back at Orsinium, its towers and rooftops nestled safely in the valley below. The city seemed small from this height, yet it pulsed with life, each home a testament to the resilience of those who had built and rebuilt it through the ages. He thought of the tales his elders told, of the first Orsinium, raised in hope and raised in fury, of exiles wandering the wilds, always searching for a place to belong. The mountains had always been there, silent witnesses to every triumph and every sorrow, offering shelter and challenge in equal measure. He remembered the words of his grandmother, spoken softly by the hearth on winter nights. The mountains are our kin, Gorbash. They do not bend to the wind, nor do they break beneath the snow. They endure, and so do we. Those words echoed now in the quiet spaces between his thoughts, grounding him in the present even as they tied him to the past. The path led higher, winding through stands of pine and spruce, their needles carpeting the ground in a fragrant green. Here and there, sunlight filtered through the branches, dappling the earth with shifting patterns of light and shadow. Gorbash moved slowly, savoring the peace that settled over him like a cloak. In the distance, a waterfall tumbled down a sheer cliff, its music a gentle counterpoint to the silence. He knelt by a clear stream, cupping his hands to drink the icy water, and felt the mountain's strength flow into him, steady and sure. As he rested, Gorbash reflected on the bond between his people and this land. The Orsimer were often called outcasts, their history marked by exile and loss. But here, in the mountains, they had found a home that asked nothing of them but patience and respect. The stone gave them shelter, the rivers quenched their thirst, and the forests offered food and fuel. In return, the Orsimer honored the land, tending its wounds and celebrating its gifts with quiet gratitude. He thought of the city below, its walls built not to keep others out, but to hold the community together. Within those walls, every stone was laid with care, every hearth lit with hope. The mountains watched over them all, their presence a constant reminder that true strength was not found in conquest, but in endurance, in the ability to weather every storm and rise again, unbroken. As the sun climbed higher, Gorbash rose and continued along the path, his heart lighter with each step. He knew that when he returned to Orsinium, he would carry the mountain's calm within him, a steady flame to share with his kin. The city, nestled in the mountain's embrace, would greet him with open arms, its people ready to face whatever the day might bring. For in the shadow of the Wrothgarian peaks, the Orsimer had learned the greatest lesson of all. To endure is to belong, And to belong is to be strong, not with the strength of iron or fire, but with the quiet, unyielding power of stone. In the heart of Orsinium, where the morning light slanted through narrow windows and danced on the walls of ancient stone, the forge of Sharn Gromak glowed like a second sun. The warmth radiated outward, banishing the last chill of night and drawing in those who sought comfort, guidance, or simply the pleasure of watching a master at work. Here, in this sanctuary of fire and metal, the day began not with the clangor of battle, but with the gentle rhythm of creation, a song as old as the mountains themselves. Sharn's forge was a place of quiet reverence. The anvil, worn smooth by generations of hands, stood at the center like an altar. Tools hung in careful order along the walls, each with its own story, each shaped by necessity and love. The air was thick with the scent of coal and hot iron, mingled with the faint sweetness of mountain herbs that Sharn scattered on the coals each morning, a tradition handed down from his mother, meant to invite good fortune and keep the mind clear. Before the day's work began in earnest, Sharn would sit by the hearth and close his eyes, listening to the city's awakening, the laughter of children, the distant call of a herdsman, the soft murmur of voices in the marketplace. He would hum a tune, low and resonant, letting the melody settle in his chest and flow outward with each breath. It was an old Orsimer song, one that spoke of stone and fire, of loss and hope, of the unbroken thread that bound his people to the land and to each other. As the first customers arrived, Sharn greeted them with a nod and a smile, his hands already moving with practiced grace. There was no rush here, no frantic pace. Each piece he crafted, be it a simple cooking pot, a sturdy plowshare, or a finely balanced sword, was made with the same care and attention. For Sharn, the act of creation was a form of meditation, a way to honor his ancestors and to give thanks for the gifts of the mountain. The forge itself seemed to breathe with him, the bellows sighing, the coals crackling, the metal singing as it yielded to his will. With each strike of the hammer, Sharn shaped not only the iron, but his own thoughts and memories. He remembered his father's hands, strong and sure, guiding his own small fingers as they learned the weight of the hammer. He remembered the stories told by his grandmother as she polished the family's heirloom blades, her voice weaving tales of heroes and homecomings. As the morning wore on, the forge became a gathering place for the community. Young apprentices watched in awe as Sharn demonstrated the delicate art of tempering steel, their eyes wide with wonder at the interplay of heat and strength. Elders stopped by to share news or to reminisce about days gone by, their laughter mingling with the music of the anvil. Even travelers from distant lands found themselves drawn to the forge, enchanted by the harmony of labor and song. Sharn took pride in his work, but he took greater pride in the way his craft brought people together. He believed that every tool, every blade, every ornament he made carried a piece of his spirit, a silent promise of resilience, of beauty born from hardship. He often said that the true measure of a smith was not the sharpness of his swords, but the warmth of his hearth and the strength of his bonds with others. On this particular morning, as the sun climbed higher and the city bustled with life, Sharn began work on a new commission, a ceremonial axe for the city's coming festival. He selected the finest ore, smelted it with care, and began to shape it with slow, deliberate strokes. As he worked, he sang softly, the words rising and falling in time with the hammer's rhythm. Stone remembers. Fire forgives. Iron endures. In the mountain lives. The apprentices joined in, their voices tentative at first, then growing stronger as the melody filled the forge. The song echoed out into the streets, a gentle reminder of the strength and unity that defined Orsinium. Passers-by paused to listen, some humming along, others simply letting the music wash over them like a blessing. By midday, the axe began to take shape, a thing of beauty and purpose, its blade etched with swirling patterns that told the story of Orsinium's rebirth. Sharn worked with a steady hand, his mind focused and clear. He thought of the festival to come, of the laughter and joy that would fill the city, of the way the mountains would watch in silent approval as their children celebrated another year of survival and hope. As the final touches were made, Sharn set the axe aside to cool and wipe the sweat from his brow. He looked around at the faces gathered in the forge, apprentices, elders, travelers, friends, and felt a deep sense of contentment. The song of the smith was more than music. It was a thread that wove the community together, a melody that echoed in every heart. In the gentle glow of the forge, with the mountains standing watch outside and the city alive with promise, Sharn Gromak knew that his work was more than craft. It was legacy, it was love. It was the quiet strength that would carry Orsinium through whatever storms might come. And so, as the day moved forward and the sun traced its arc across the sky, the smith's song continued, a hymn to resilience, to unity, and to the enduring spirit of the gentle giants of Orsinium. As the sun reached its zenith and the warmth of day settled over Orsinium, the city's heart pulsed with life around the great communal hearths. These fires, tended since the city's rebirth, were more than mere sources of heat. They were the soul of the Orsimer people, a living memory of unity, endurance, and hope. Their flames flickered and danced, casting golden light across stone walls and drawing the city's folk together in the gentle embrace of shared tradition. In the main square, at the largest of these hearths, families gathered as they had for generations. The fire crackled, sending up occasional sparks that twirled like tiny stars before fading into the bright air. Around it, Orsimer of all ages found comfort. Elders with faces lined by time, children with wide eyes and quick laughter, warriors resting from their morning's patrol, and artisans whose hands bore the marks of honest labor. Here, the boundaries between clan and craft, age and ambition, softened and fell away, replaced by the simple kinship of belonging. Gorbash, having returned from his morning walk in the mountains, joined his family at their customary place near the hearth. His mother, strong and broad-shouldered, was already stirring a pot of thick stew, its aroma rich with mountain herbs and smoked goat. His younger sister played at her feet, arranging smooth river stones in careful patterns, while his father spoke quietly with a neighbor about the coming festival and the repairs needed for the city's western gate. The warmth of the fire seeped into Gorbash's bones, easing the last of the mountain's chill and filling him with a quiet contentment. Around the hearth, stories flowed as freely as the stew. An elder named Murgle, whose memories stretched back to the last rebuilding of Orsinium, began to recount a tale from his youth. A winter so harsh that the snow piled higher than a man's shoulders and the rivers froze solid. Yet even then, he said, the fires never went out. The people huddled together, sharing what little they had, and the city endured. His voice, deep and steady, carried the weight of truth and the comfort of tradition. Others added their own memories. A mother recalling the birth of her first child by the fire's glow, a young smith describing the pride he felt when his first blade was presented at the hearth for blessing, a hunter telling of the night he returned with a rare mountain stag and the feast that followed. Each story was a thread in the tapestry of Orsinium, woven together by laughter, tears, and the unspoken promise that no one would ever face darkness alone. The hearth fires were not only for warmth and stories, they were the center of the city's rituals and celebrations. When a child came of age, their first meal as an adult was taken by the fire, surrounded by family and friends. When a couple pledged themselves to one another, their vows were spoken in its light, and the flames were fed with fragrant herbs to bless their union. Even in sorrow, when a loved one was lost, the community gathered at the hearth to share memories and to remind one another that grief, too, could be softened by the warmth of kinship. As the afternoon wore on, the square filled with the music of daily life. Children chased one another around the hearth, their laughter ringing out like bells. Merchants called greetings to old friends, and the aroma of baking bread mingled with the scent of wood smoke and simmering stew. The city's wise woman, Bazruga, made her rounds, offering a kind word here, a healing herb there, her presence as steady and reassuring as the fire itself. For the Orsimer, the hearth was also a place of learning. On quiet afternoons, elders taught the young the old songs and the histories of their people, tales of Malacath's blessing, of exile and return, of the many times Orsinium had been destroyed and rebuilt. The children listened, sometimes fidgeting, sometimes rapt, their faces illuminated by the shifting light. In this way, the city's memory was passed down, not in books or scrolls, but in living voices and the glow of the hearth. As evening approached, preparations for the communal meal began in earnest. Pots were filled, bread was broken, and platters of roasted vegetables and cured meats were passed from hand to hand. There was no distinction between rich and poor, guest and host. All were welcome at the hearth, and all shared in the bounty. A sense of peace settled over the square, the kind that comes only from knowing one's place in the world and the company of those who care. When the sun finally dipped behind the mountains and the shadows grew long, the fire's glow grew brighter, casting dancing patterns on the faces gathered around it. The city quieted, the day's labors giving way to rest and reflection. Gorbash sat with his family, his heart full, and watched as the flames flickered and leapt, each spark a reminder of the resilience and unity that defined his people. In the gentle light of the hearth fires, Orsinium was more than a city. It was a home, a sanctuary against the storms of the world, a place where the gentle giants could gather in peace and strength. The fire would burn through the night, as it always had, its warmth a promise that whatever the dawn might bring, the people of Orsinium would face it together, their spirits unbroken, their hearts forever bound by the glow of the hearth. As the sun dipped past its zenith and the warmth of the day mellowed into a gentle hush, Orsinium entered a tranquil interlude, a sacred pause in the city's rhythm when the gentle giants of the mountains allowed themselves to rest. In the city's heart, the great communal hearth still flickered, its embers casting a drowsy glow on the stone floors. Around it, elders settled into carved wooden chairs, their broad frames softened by age and the comfort of familiar ritual. Some closed their eyes, heads nodding as they drifted into shallow sleep, while others gazed quietly into the flames, their thoughts wandering through memories as old as the city itself. In these restful hours, the true spirit of the Orsimer revealed itself. The world beyond Orsinium's walls often saw only their strength, their imposing stature, their powerful arms, their reputation as warriors. But here, in the gentle peace of afternoon, another truth emerged. The Orsimer were caretakers of memory, keepers of stories, and lovers of quietude. Their rest was not idleness, but a kind of meditation, a time to honor the body, to tend the spirit, and to remember the generations who had come before. Gorbash, still warmed from the hearth and the company of his family, wandered through the quieter lanes of the city. He passed by a small courtyard where a group of elders sat in a circle, their voices low and melodic as they recited ancient verses. The cadence of their words was soothing, like the murmur of a distant stream, and Gorbash paused to listen, letting the poetry wash over him. The verses spoke of mountains and rivers, of loss and renewal, of the slow, patient work of building a home from stone and hope. Elsewhere, in shaded alcoves and sunlit gardens, Orsimer artisans set aside their tools and reclined on benches, their hands resting in their laps. Some closed their eyes, letting the gentle breeze cool their skin. Others watched the clouds drift across the sky, their thoughts as unhurried as the wind. In these moments, the burdens of the day, worries about weather, repairs, or distant threats, faded into the background, replaced by a sense of peace that settled deep in the bones. Within the city's library, the youngest children napped in quiet corners, curled up with stone tablets or woven blankets. Their elders watched over them, their faces softened by affection. The Orsimer believed that dreams were gifts from Malacath, windows into the wisdom of ancestors and the secrets of the mountains. In sleep, the children's breathing was slow and even, their dreams filled with stories of gentle giants, talking animals, and hidden valleys where peace reigned eternal. The forges, too, fell silent for a time. Sharn Gromak, the master smith, sat on a low stool near the cooling embers, his great hands folded in his lap. He gazed at the tools of his trade, the hammers, the tongs, the half-finished blades, and felt a quiet pride in the day's work. In the hush of the forge, he allowed his mind to drift, recalling the songs his mother had sung to him as a child, the lessons his father had taught him with gentle patience. Rest, he knew, was as important as labor. It was in these moments of stillness that new ideas took root, that the spirit was renewed for the challenges ahead. Even the city's guardians, those charged with watching the walls and gates, found time for rest. They took turns, sharing the burden so that each might enjoy a moment of quiet. On the ramparts, a pair of sentries leaned against the stone, their eyes half closed as they listened to the wind. The mountains stretched out before them, vast and eternal, their peaks softened by afternoon light. The sentries spoke little, content to share the silence, their presence a reminder that strength need not always be loud or forceful. As the afternoon wore on, the city seemed to breathe more slowly, its pulse steady and calm. The Orsimer, gentle giants all, surrendered to the wisdom of rest, not as an escape from duty, but as a celebration of life's quieter joys. In these hours, they honored the cycles of the world, work and rest, struggle and peace, sorrow and joy. They understood that endurance was not only a matter of muscle and will, but of knowing when to pause, when to listen, and when to simply be. In the quiet corners of Orsinium, dreams mingled with memory. Elders remembered the first stones laid after the city's last destruction, the songs sung to comfort frightened children, the hands joined in rebuilding. Young ones dreamed of future festivals, of new stories yet to be told, of a city that would endure long after they were gone. The gentle giants at rest became bridges between past and future, their stillness a promise that Orsinium's heart would never falter. As evening approached, and the city slowly stirred from its reverie, a sense of renewal filled the air. The Orsimer rose from their seats, stretched their limbs, and greeted one another with soft words and easy smiles. The fires were stoked, the forges relit, the kitchens filled with the sounds and scents of supper. But for a little while longer, the peace of rest lingered, a gentle echo in every heart. For in Orsinium, the gentle giants knew that true strength was found not only in the building and the striving, but in the quiet moments between, in the warmth of the hearth, the hush of the garden, the silence of shared dreams. And so, as night approached, the city prepared to gather once more around its fires, grateful for the gift of rest and the enduring embrace of the mountains. In the gentle lull that followed the city's afternoon rest, a subtle energy began to stir in the shaded alcoves and winding lanes of Orsinium. It was a time when the city's pulse slowed, when the clang of the forges faded, and the laughter of children softened to a murmur. In this hush, the people of Orsinium turned, as they always had, to the wisdom of their elders, and above all, to the gentle guidance of the wise woman, Bazruga. Bazruga's dwelling stood at the edge of a small herb garden, tucked between the city's stone walls and the first outcroppings of the mountain. Her door was always open, and the scent of dried lavender, mountain mint, and sweet marjoram drifted on the breeze, mingling with the sharper tang of fresh-cut pine. Inside, the space was cluttered but comforting, shelves lined with clay jars, bundles of herbs hanging from the rafters, and a low table where Bazruga prepared her teas and poultices. The light that filtered through the window was softened by woven curtains, casting everything in a gentle, golden haze. Bazruga herself was a figure of quiet authority. Her hair, once black as obsidian, was now silvered with age and bound in a thick braid that reached her waist. Her hands were broad and strong, marked by years of work, yet her touch was always gentle. Her eyes, deep green, flecked with gold, held the calm of ancient forests and the patience of stone. Though her voice was soft, it carried the weight of generations, and when she spoke, even the most restless child would fall silent to listen. On this particular afternoon, Bazruga sat on her low stool, preparing a healing tea for a young mother who had come seeking relief from worry and sleeplessness. She worked with practiced ease, crushing dried valerian root and chamomile between her fingers, adding a pinch of honeycomb for sweetness. As the kettle steamed, she listened, truly listened, to the young woman's fears, the health of her newborn, the uncertainty of the coming winter, the pressure to be strong in a world that often seemed unforgiving. Bazruga's wisdom was not the kind found in books or scrolls. It was the wisdom of lived experience, of watching the seasons turn and the city rise and fall, of seeing children grow and elders pass into memory. She spoke little at first, letting the young woman's words spill out like water over smooth stones. When she finally replied, her words were measured and kind. "You are not alone in your worry. Every mother in Orsinium has felt the same fear, and every child has grown strong beneath these mountains. Trust in your strength, and let others share your burdens." As the tea steeped, Bazruga told a story, one of her favorites, passed down from her own grandmother. It was about a time when the city had faced a terrible famine, and the people had nearly lost hope. But instead of turning inward, they had gathered at the hearth, sharing what little they had, and found that together, they could endure even the harshest winter. The lesson was simple, but profound. When we share our fears and our hopes, we find the strength to carry on. Word of Bazruga's wisdom had spread far beyond her garden. Throughout Orsinium, people came to her for advice. Young warriors anxious about their first patrol, artisans struggling with a difficult project, elders weighed down by memories of loss. She greeted each visitor with the same gentle smile and the same careful attention, never rushing, never judging. Her remedies were as much for the spirit as for the body. Herbs to ease pain, stories to soothe the mind, a touch on the shoulder to remind the lonely that they were seen. Children loved to visit her garden, drawn by the promise of honeyed treats and the magic of her stories. Bazruga would gather them around her, weaving tales of the old gods and the first Orsimer, of mountain spirits and hidden springs. She taught them the names of the plants and their uses, showing them how to crush yarrow for wounds or brew nettle tea for strength. Under her patient guidance, the children learned not only the secrets of the earth, but the deeper lesson of patience and care. In times of crisis, it was Bazruga who brought the city together. When illness swept through Orsinium, she moved from house to house, tending the sick and comforting the fearful. When a dispute threatened to divide the clans, she called the elders to her garden and spoke with quiet authority until peace was restored. Her wisdom was a balm, her presence a steadying force in a world that could be unpredictable and harsh. Bazruga's influence extended even to the city's leaders. The chief himself often sought her counsel, sitting with her in the cool shade of her garden and listening as she spoke of the old ways, of the importance of mercy and patience, of the need to balance strength with compassion. She reminded him that true leadership was not about command, but about service, about tending the needs of the people as carefully as one tended a garden. As the day wore on and the shadows lengthened, Bazruga's garden became a place of quiet refuge. Neighbors stopped by to share news or seek advice, to trade herbs, or simply to sit in silence and watch the sun set over the mountains. Bazruga welcomed them all, her heart as open as her door. She believed that wisdom was not a treasure to be hoarded, but a gift to be shared, a light that grew brighter the more it was given away. In the stillness of evening, after her last visitor had gone, Bazruga sat alone in her garden, sipping a cup of her own tea. She watched the stars appear, one by one, above the peaks, and listened to the distant sounds of the city settling into night. She thought of all the lives she had touched, all the stories she had heard, all the burdens she had helped to lift. She knew that her work would never truly be finished, that as long as there were people in need, there would be a place for wisdom and kindness. And so, the wise woman of Orsinium remained a quiet pillar of her community, her presence woven into the fabric of the city like the scent of herbs in the air. In her gentle care, the people found not only healing, but hope, a reminder that even in the shadow of the mountains, even in the face of hardship, the gentle giants of Orsinium could endure and thrive and carry their wisdom forward into the dawn. Beyond the city's sturdy walls, where the foothills of the Wrothgarian Mountains softened into rolling meadows and wildflower-carpeted banks, the river Carth wound its ancient way. The river was old, older than Orsinium, older than the memory of any living Orsimer. Its waters, born in the high snows and fed by secret springs, had carved their path through stone and time, shaping the land as surely as the gentle giants shaped their city. To the people of Orsinium, the Carth was more than a river. It was a living song, a constant presence, a source of sustenance and solace. In the quiet hours between afternoon and dusk, Gorbash often found himself drawn to the river's edge. The city, with its comforting noise and warmth, faded into the background as he followed a narrow path through stands of birch and pine. The air here was cooler, tinged with the scent of moss and river mud, and the only sounds were the low chatter of birds and the steady, soothing rush of water over stone. Gorbash would settle on a flat rock, legs dangling above the current, and let the world slow to the river's pace. The Carth song was ever-changing. In spring, it ran swift and wild, swollen with meltwater, its voice a jubilant chorus that echoed through the valleys and filled the air with promise. In summer, it softened, the current gentle and clear, reflecting the sky and the overhanging branches in perfect, trembling mirrors. Autumn brought a deeper note, as fallen leaves swirled in eddies and the river carried the memory of distant storms. Even in winter, when ice ronned the banks and snow muffled the world, the Carth whispered beneath its frozen skin, a secret melody for those who listened closely. The Orsimer had always listened. Long before the city's first stones were laid, their ancestors camped along these banks, drinking from the river's cool depths and learning its moods. They built their first shelters here, fished its pools, and gathered the reeds that grew thick in the shallows. The river gave them life, and in return, they honored it with songs and offerings, small tokens cast into the current, prayers whispered to the water's spirit. Even now, when the city's needs were met by wells and cisterns, the people of Orsinium returned to the Carth to remember where they had come from. Gorbash's grandmother had taught him the old river songs, melodies that rose and fell with the current, words that spoke of longing and return. Sometimes, he would sing them softly to himself, his voice blending with the river's music. The sound soothed him, as it had soothed generations before, reminding him that he was part of something vast and enduring. When he was troubled, he would bring his worries to the river, letting them drift away on the water's surface, carried downstream to be transformed and forgotten. The river was also a place of gathering. On warm evenings, families would come down from the city, spreading blankets on the grassy banks and sharing simple meals beneath the open sky. Children splashed in the shallows, their laughter ringing out like silver bells, while elders sat in a circle, telling stories as old as the stones. The river's song wove through these gatherings, a gentle thread that bound everyone together. Even the city's most stoic warriors softened here, their voices joining in the old songs, their hearts lightened by the river's embrace. There were rituals, too, that centered on the Carth. When a child was born, a small vial of river water was sprinkled on their brow, a blessing for strength and endurance. When someone died, their family brought a stone to the river, setting it among the others that lined the banks, a quiet memorial, a promise that the departed would be remembered as long as the water flowed. The river marked the turning of the seasons, the rhythms of planting and harvest, the cycles of joy and sorrow that shaped the life of the city. On this evening, as the sun dipped behind the peaks and the sky blushed with the colors of dusk, Gorbash sat alone by the river, his thoughts drifting like leaves on the current. He watched as the water caught the last light, turning gold and crimson, and listened to the song that had no beginning and no end. The river spoke of patience, of persistence, of the quiet strength that came from moving forward, no matter the obstacles in the way. He thought of the stories carved in stone in the library, the wisdom of Bazruga, the warmth of the hearth, and the steady hands of Sharon at the forge. All of these, he realized, were like the river, shaping, nourishing, enduring. The gentle giants of Orsinium had learned from the Karth to bend without breaking, to carry burdens lightly, to find beauty in the journey as well as the destination. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Gorbash rose and made his way back toward the city, the river's song echoing in his heart. He knew that tomorrow, and all the days to come, the Karth would still be there, flowing past the walls of Orsinium, singing its eternal song, a reminder that the gentle giants were never truly alone. They were part of the land, the water, the story that would go on as long as the mountains stood and the river ran. And so, in the hush of twilight, the song of the river Karth continued, soft, enduring, and full of hope, carrying the dreams of Orsinium into the waiting night. As the day surrendered to evening and the last golden rays of sunlight retreated behind the Wrothgarian Mountains, Orsinium began its transition from a city of labor to a sanctuary of remembrance. Shadows lengthened across the cobblestone streets, and the air grew cool with the promise of night. Throughout the city, Orsimer moved with quiet purpose, their broad hands carrying lanterns of polished horn and hammered copper. This was the hour of the ritual of remembrance, a sacred time when the gentle giants of Orsinium honored their past and reaffirmed their commitment to the future. The ritual began, as all important things in Orsinium did, with fire. At the city's highest point, where the watchtower stood sentinel against the darkening sky, the chief himself kindled the first flame. He used no magic, no special tools, only flint and steel, the ancient implements that had served the Orsimer since time immemorial. The spark caught, grew, and blossomed into a steady flame that cast its warm light across his weathered face. The chief, a warrior who had led his people through drought and plenty, through peace and strife, raised the lantern high above his head. "We remember," he called, his voice deep and resonant, carrying across the city below. "We remember those who came before." From the tower, the flame was passed to the elders who waited on the ramparts. Each received the fire with solemn dignity, touching torch to torch, lantern to lantern, until a circle of light crowned the city walls. The elders, their faces etched with the lines of long years and hard-won wisdom, spoke the names of those who had built the first Orsinium, the visionaries who had dreamed of a home for the Orsimer when all others had cast them out. Below, in the city's heart, families gathered in the central square. Children stood close to their parents, eyes wide with wonder as the lights appeared along the walls like earthbound stars. This was not a somber occasion, despite its gravity. There was a gentle joy in the air, a sense of connection that transcended the boundaries of time and death. The Orsimer did not fear their past. They embraced it, drawing strength from the knowledge that they were part of an unbroken chain that stretched back through countless generations. Gorbash stood with his family, his father's hand resting on his shoulder. They watched as Bazruga, the wise woman, approached the great hearth at the center of the square. In her arms, she carried a bundle of herbs, mountain sage, juniper, and sweetgrass, gathered from the slopes above the city. With deliberate movements, she cast the herbs into the flames. The fire flared, sending up a column of fragrant smoke that spiraled toward the star-strewn sky. "We remember the fallen," Bazruga intoned, her voice soft yet carrying to every corner of the square. "We remember those who gave their lives that Orsinium might endure." The assembled Orsimer bowed their heads, each calling to mind the faces of those they had lost: parents, siblings, children, friends. In the silence, there was a sense of presence, as if the departed stood among them once more, drawn back by the power of memory and love. Gorbash thought of his grandfather, a stonemason who had helped rebuild the city after the last great siege. He remembered the stories, the laughter, the calloused hands that had taught him to carve his first rune. Now came the most sacred part of the ritual. From every home and workshop, from forge and garden, from barracks and library, the people of Orsinium emerged carrying their lanterns. They moved in procession along the city's winding streets, a river of light flowing toward the walls. As they walked, they sang a low, melodic chant that spoke of endurance and hope, of stone that weathered storm and fire that warmed the night. The song had no author, no beginning that anyone could recall. It had been sung in times of triumph and in the darkest hours of defeat. It had echoed through mountain passes as the Orsimer sought refuge, and it had risen from the rubble of cities razed by enemies who feared what they could not understand. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of centuries. Stone remembers, though flesh may fall. Fire endures, though darkness calls. We are the children of mountain and forge. Unbroken, unbowed, we stand tall. Sharn Gromak, the master smith, led a group of apprentices along the eastern path. His lantern was an intricate work of art, fashioned from iron and copper, with delicate cutwork that cast patterns of light and shadow on the ground before him. The young smiths followed, their faces solemn yet proud, each carrying a lantern that represented their growing skill and the legacy they would one day inherit. "We remember the craft," Sharn said, his deep voice joining the chorus that filled the city. "We remember the knowledge passed from hand to hand, the secrets of fire and metal that have sustained our people through the ages." Along the western path, Borbal Giareazgash led the scribes and scholars from the library of stone tablets. Their lanterns were simpler in design, but no less beautiful, clear horn panels etched with the ancient runes of the Orsimer language. As they walked, they recited the names of great thinkers and storytellers, keeping alive the intellectual tradition that many outsiders never suspected existed among the so-called barbarians of the mountains. "We remember the word," Borbal said, her aged voice strong with conviction. "We remember the wisdom carved in stone, the stories that bind us together, the truth that cannot be erased." Children ran alongside their elders, their small faces illuminated by the glow of lanterns too heavy for them to carry. They were not merely spectators but participants, already learning the importance of memory and tradition. The youngest among them had been assigned the simplest task, to gather smooth stones from the riverbed, which would later be placed along the city walls as symbols of permanence and strength. As the processions converged at the base of the walls, the chief descended from the watchtower to meet them. The circle was complete, light above and below, past and present joined in common purpose. Now, one by one, the people of Orsinium approached the walls. At regular intervals, niches had been carved into the stone, small hollows just large enough to hold a lantern. Each family had their place, marked by symbols and runes that told their story. Gorbash watched as his father placed their lantern in the niche that bore their clan's mark, a hammer crossed with a quill, representing their lineage of both smiths and scholars. The light flickered, caught, and steadied, joining hundreds of others that now lined the walls. In that moment, Gorbash felt a profound sense of belonging, of being part of something greater than himself. This was not merely a city of stone and timber, it was a living monument to resilience and hope. "We remember the rebuilding," the chief said, his voice carrying across the now silent crowd. "We remember that Orsinium has fallen 7 times, and 7 times we have raised it from the dust. We are not defined by defeat, but by our refusal to surrender." The ritual continued as the night deepened. The Orsimer gathered in small groups, sharing food and drink, telling stories of those whose memory they honored. There was laughter amid the reverence, tears amid the joy. Children fell asleep in their parents' arms, dreaming perhaps of ancestors they had never met but whose blood flowed in their veins. Elders sat together, speaking in low voices of battles long past and friends long gone. In a quiet corner of the square, Bazruga conducted a more intimate ceremony for those who had lost loved ones in the past year. She listened as they spoke the names of the departed, offering each a small cup of tea brewed from herbs grown in her garden. The tea was bitter at first sip, then surprisingly sweet, a reminder that grief, too, could transform with time. "The pain you feel is the measure of your love," she told a young woman who wept for her father. "Carry it not as a burden, but as a gift. In remembering him, you keep him alive in the only way that matters." As midnight approached, the lanterns along the walls burned low. This, too, was part of the ritual, the acknowledgement that all things, even memory, must be tended lest they fade. The chief called for silence, and in the hush that followed, he spoke the final words of the ceremony. "We remember who we are. We are Orsimer, children of Malacath, builders of Orsinium. We have known exile and homecoming, defeat and victory, sorrow and joy. We stand here now because those who came before us refused to be forgotten. We light these lanterns not only for them, but for those who will come after us, that they may know their heritage in their home." With these words, the ritual of remembrance drew to a close. Families retrieved their lanterns from the wall, carrying the light back to their homes where it would burn through the night. Tomorrow, the city would return to its rhythms of work and play, of learning and creation. But tonight, in the gentle glow of hundreds of lanterns, the past and present merged, and the future seemed as solid and enduring as the mountains themselves. Gorbash lingered in the square after most had departed. He watched the stars wheel overhead, bright and distant, and thought about the cycles of time, how the city had fallen and risen, how generations had passed like seasons, how the mountains remained unchanged through it all. In the ritual of remembrance, he had found not only connection to his ancestors, but clarity about his own place in the continuing story of Orsinium. As he finally turned toward home, lantern in hand, he felt a deep sense of peace. The gentle giants of Orsinium had built their city not once but many times, each rebuilding an act of defiance and hope. They had faced hatred and misunderstanding from the world beyond their walls, yet they had chosen to respond not with bitterness but with quiet strength and dignity. In remembering their past, they had found the courage to face whatever the future might bring. And so, cradled in the shadow of the mountains, Orsinium slept, its walls adorned with the last flickering lanterns, its streets quiet save for the soft footfalls of the night watch. Its heart beating with the steady rhythm of a people who had learned that true strength lies not in conquest, but in remembrance. Hidden within the sturdy walls and winding alleys of Orsinium, where the city stone face met the living mountain, there existed a world apart, a collection of secret gardens, known only to those who called the city home. To the outsider, Orsinium might seem a fortress of iron and granite, a place of stoic endurance and martial pride. Yet within its heart, life flourished in quiet, unexpected corners, where the gentle giants of the city had coaxed beauty from the most unlikely of soils. The secret gardens were not grand or ostentatious. They were humble, tucked behind smithies and beneath arched stairways, nestled in courtyards shielded by high walls or blooming atop the flat roofs of stone houses. Some were little more than narrow beds of earth, others sprawling tangles of green that spilled over low fences and crept along the stones. Each was a patchwork of color and fragrance, a living testament to the patience and hope that defined the Orsimer spirit. Gorbash had known of these gardens since childhood. His mother tended one behind their home, a shaded haven where mountain thyme and wild garlic grew alongside sturdy cabbages and delicate bluebells. It was here, in the hush of early morning or the golden calm of dusk, that she taught him to plant seeds and pull weeds, to recognize the subtle signs of growth and change. "The mountain gives us stone," she would say, her hands deep in the earth, "but it also gives us life. We honor both." Many of the gardens were communal, cared for by clusters of neighbors who shared the work and the harvest. In one sunlit courtyard, a group of elders gathered each afternoon, their laughter mingling with the soft buzz of bees. They traded stories as they pruned berry bushes and watered rows of beans, their movement slow but sure. Children darted between the rows, chasing butterflies and plucking the first ripe fruits, their hands and faces stained with juice and soil. The gardens were more than a source of food or beauty. They were sanctuaries, places of healing and reflection, where the burdens of the world seemed to grow lighter. After a long day at the forge, Sharn Gromak would retreat to his rooftop garden, where pots of lavender and rosemary lined the parapet. He would sit among the fragrant leaves, letting the cool mountain air soothe his tired muscles, the scent of herbs clearing his mind. Sometimes, he would hum the old songs, his deep voice blending with the wind, and feel the weight of generations settled gently on his shoulders. Bazruga, the wise woman, kept a garden of her own, hidden behind a low stone wall near her home. Here, she grew the herbs and flowers used in her teas and poultices, yarrow for wounds, chamomile for sleep, marigold for courage. The garden was a tapestry of color, alive with the flutter of moths and the soft hum of bees. Bazruga believed that every plant had its own spirit, its own wisdom to share, and she tended them with the same gentle care she offered her people. The secret gardens were also places of memory. Many contained small shrines or stones etched with the names of loved ones lost. Families would gather there on quiet evenings, lighting candles and sharing stories, their voices low and reverent. Gorbash remembered the first time he had visited the Garden of Remembrance after his grandfather's passing. His grandmother had placed a smooth river stone at the base of a flowering bush, whispering a prayer for safe passage and peaceful dreams. He is part of the garden now, she had told Gorbash, growing with the flowers, watching over us. In the spring, the gardens burst into riotous bloom, a celebration of life's return. Crocuses and snowdrops pushed through the last crust of snow, their petals bright against the gray stone. Vines of morning glory climbed trellises and walls, their blue trumpets opening to greet the sun. The city's children wove garlands from wildflowers and danced through the streets, their laughter echoing from rooftop to courtyard. Even the most stoic warriors found themselves smiling at the sight, reminded that strength could be gentle and hope could be green. The Orsimer's love for their gardens was born of necessity as much as desire. The mountain soil was thin and rocky, the weather harsh and unpredictable. Yet through patience, ingenuity, and a willingness to share, the people coaxed abundance from the earth. Rainwater was carefully collected and distributed, compost made from kitchen scraps and fallen leaves. Seeds were saved and traded, cuttings shared from garden to garden, so that no one would go without. The gardens also served as a quiet resistance to the hardships of the world beyond Orsinium's walls. When the city was besieged, when food was scarce and spirits low, it was the gardens that sustained the people, body and soul. Herds for healing, roots for eating, flowers for hope. In times of peace, they became places of celebration, where couples pledged themselves beneath flowering trees and elders blessed the newborn with sprigs of rosemary and thyme. At night, the secret gardens transformed. Lanterns hung from branches and eaves, casting pools of golden light on the leaves. The air was cool and fragrant, filled with the soft sounds of crickets and the distant rush of the river. Lovers met in the shadows, whispering promises beneath the stars. Elders sat alone or in pairs, remembering old friends and watching the moon rise over the mountains. In these quiet hours, the gardens seemed to breathe, their roots reaching deep into the earth, their leaves trembling in the night breeze. Gorbash often found himself wandering the gardens when sleep eluded him. He would walk the winding paths, pausing to touch a familiar leaf or inhale the scent of blooming sage. Sometimes he would find others there, a neighbor tending late to the beans, a child searching for a lost toy, Bazruga gathering herbs by moonlight. They would nod in silent greeting, sharing the peace of the garden without words. The secret gardens of Orsinium were a testament to the gentle strength of its people. In the face of hardship and loss, they chose to nurture and create, to find beauty in the smallest things. They understood that a city was more than its walls or its warriors. It was the sum of its quiet joys, its shared labors, its hidden places of hope. And so, in every season, the gardens grew, silent, steadfast, and full of promise, reminding all who walked their paths that even in the shadow of the mountains, life would always find a way to blow. In the hush of Orsinium's secret gardens, beneath the dappled shade of mountain birch and the gentle hum of bees, stories were told that shaped the soul of the city. Some were tales of triumph, others of sorrow, but none was more quietly revered than the tale of the lost chief, a story that lingered in the hearts of the gentle giants as both a warning and a promise. It was on a night much like this, with the mountain winds whispering through the city's narrow lanes and lanterns flickering in the courtyards, that Gorbash's grandmother called the family together. The children gathered at her feet, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of the hearth, while the elders sat in a semicircle, their eyes reflecting the memory of old wounds and hard-won peace. "Listen well," she began, her voice steady as the stone beneath their feet, "for this is the tale of Chief Urgash Gromak, the one who led us into exile and taught us what it truly means to be Orsimer. Urgash had been a chief in a time of great turmoil, when Orsinium's walls had been shattered by betrayal and the city's people scattered to the wilds. He was a leader of uncommon strength, his voice as commanding as thunder, his arm as steady as the mountain's root. Yet he was also a man burdened by loss of kin, of home, of the certainty that once bound his people together. When the fires of Orsinium's destruction faded and the survivors gathered in the shadow of the ruined gates, it was Urgash who stepped forward. He did not weep, nor did he rage. Instead, he spoke of endurance, of the need to carry the city within their hearts when its stones have been cast down. "Orsinium is not these walls," he said, his voice echoing into the night. "It is us, our memory, our hope, our promise to one another." Under Urgash's guidance, the Orsimer became wanderers. They moved to the high passes and deep forests, seeking shelter where they could, forging new bonds with every hardship faced. The journey was long and bitter. Some fell to hunger, others to the blades of those who saw only monsters in the gentle giants. Through it all, Urgash walked at the front, his back straight, his eyes always searching for a place where his people might rest and rebuild. Yet exile wore upon the chief. The weight of leadership grew heavier with each passing season, and the hope that had once burned in his chest began to flicker. He questioned the gods, the wisdom of his ancestors, even his own heart. In the deepest winter, when the snows closed the mountain passes and the Orsimer huddled together for warmth, Urgash vanished into the night, leaving behind only his axe and a single word carved into the bark of a pine: forgive. His people searched for him, calling his name into the storm, but Urgash was gone. Some said he had gone to seek counsel from Malacath himself, to beg forgiveness for failing to protect his city. Others whispered that he had become a spirit of the mountains, watching over the exiles as they wandered the wilds. For many years, the Orsimer carried his absence like a wound, a reminder of the pain that comes with leadership and the loneliness that shadows those who bear the burdens of many. But the tale did not end in sorrow. In time, the Orsimer found a new valley, sheltered and rich, where the soil was dark and the river ran clear. There, they began to rebuild, stone by patient stone, drawing strength from the memory of Urgash and the lessons he had left them. They honored his name not with monuments, but with acts of kindness and courage, with the quiet endurance that had carried them through exile. At every festival, a place was set for the lost chief, and the children were taught to speak his name with respect. Remember, Gorbash's grandmother would say that true strength is not in never falling, but in rising again, and in forgiving those who falter. Urgash taught us that compassion is the mightiest shield, and hope the sharpest blade. The tale of the lost chief became a guiding star for Orsinium. It reminded the gentle giants that leadership was not about command, but about service, not about glory, but about sacrifice. When disputes arose, elders would recall Urgash's humility, urging patience and understanding. When sorrow threatened to overwhelm, his story offered solace, the knowledge that even in the darkest night, the promise of dawn endured. In the secret gardens, families still gather to tell the tale. They light a single lantern and set it in the grass, a beacon for lost souls and wandering hearts. They speak of Urgash's journey, of the forgiveness he sought, and of the home that was rebuilt not from stone, but from the unbreakable bonds of kinship and love. And so, the tale of the lost chief lives on in Orsinium, whispered in the quiet hours, carried in the hearts of every gentle giant who has ever known exile or return. It is a story of loss and redemption, of sorrow and hope, and above all, of the enduring strength that comes from compassion for others and for oneself. In the days following the tale of the lost chief, a subtle shift could be felt in the air of Orsinium. The city, ever resilient, seemed to breathe a little easier. its people moving through the winding streets and bustling squares with a renewed sense of purpose. It was in this atmosphere of gentle hope that a new story began to unfold. A story not of exile or sorrow, but of the forging of friendship across the boundaries that had long divided the peoples of Tamriel. It began on a morning touched by the promise of spring. The snows on the mountain slopes had begun to recede, revealing patches of green and the first brave wildflowers stretching toward the sun. In the market square, Orsimer merchants arranged their wares: iron tools, woven baskets, jars of honey and preserves, while children darted between the stalls, their laughter ringing out like the clear notes of a mountain stream. On this particular morning, a stranger arrived at the gates of Orsinium. He was a Breton merchant, his cloak travel-stained, his eyes wary but curious. For many years, the Bretons of High Rock and the Orsimer of Orsinium had viewed one another with suspicion, their histories marked by conflict and misunderstanding. Yet this merchant, whose name was Alan, had heard stories of the city's rebirth, of its gentle giants and their quiet strength. He had come not to trade in secrets or to measure the city's defenses, but simply to see for himself the truth behind the tales. The guards at the gate greeted Alan with cautious courtesy. They asked his purpose, examined his wares, and, finding nothing amiss, welcomed him into the city with a nod and a word of warning. Orsinium is a place of peace now. We hope you come in that spirit. Alan nodded, understanding the weight of such words, and stepped through the gates into a world unlike any he had known. At first, the city seemed overwhelming, a maze of stone and shadow, its people taller and broader than any he had seen. Yet as he wandered the market, he saw not the brutish savages of rumor, but artisans and families, elders and children, each moving with a quiet dignity. He watched as a smith presented a newly forged plow to a farmer, as a baker handed a sweet roll to a hungry child, as neighbors greeted one another with warmth and laughter. The city's strength, Alan realized, was not in its walls or its weapons, but in the bonds that held its people together. It was not long before Alan found himself the object of curious glances. Children stared at his Breton features, whispering behind their hands. Merchants eyed his unfamiliar wares: fine cloth, carved trinkets, a small cask of Breton wine, with interest and skepticism. Yet it was Gorbash, ever open-hearted, who first approached the stranger. With a smile and a gesture of welcome, he introduced himself and offered to show Alan the city. Together, they wandered through the streets, Alan asking questions and Gorbash answering with patience and pride. They visited the Great Forge, where Sharn Gromak demonstrated the art of Orsimer smithing, his hammer ringing out a song of unity and skill. They paused in the secret gardens, where Buzzruga gathered herbs and shared stories of healing and hope. They sat by the banks of the river Karth, listening to its song and sharing tales of their respective homelands. As the day wore on, Alan found himself drawn into the rhythm of Orsinium. He traded a bolt of Breton linen for a basket of mountain berries, a carved figurine for a length of finely wrought chain. He shared his wine with Gorbash's family, who in turn offered him a place at their hearth and a bowl of steaming still. The barriers between them, of race, of history, of old wounds, began to soften, replaced by the simple joys of food, laughter, and shared experience. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains and the city gathered around its communal hearth, Alan was invited to join the festivities. The fire crackled, casting warm light on the faces of those gathered. Songs were sung, stories told, and Alan found himself swept up in the celebration. He listened as the elders recounted the tale of the lost chief, as children performed the dance in honor of the coming spring, as Gorbash's mother wove a garland of wildflowers and placed it gently on his head. In that moment, Alan understood something profound. Friendship, he realized, was not forged in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the quiet moments of trust and kindness. in the sharing of a meal, the exchange of a story, the willingness to see another not as an enemy or a stranger, but as a fellow traveler on the road of life. The days that followed saw Alan welcomed more fully into the life of Orsinium. He worked alongside the Orsimer in the fields, learning the rhythms of planting and harvest. He helped repair a section of the city wall, his hands guided by the steady strength of Orsimer masons. He even joined a group of children on a foraging expedition, laughing as they taught him to distinguish edible roots from those best left untouched. Slowly, the city's people came to trust Alan, and he, in turn, came to love Orsinium. He marveled at the resilience of its people, at their capacity for forgiveness and renewal. He saw how the memory of exile had shaped them, not into bitter outcasts, but into gentle giants who understood the value of community and the power of hope. When the time came for Alan to return to High Rock, he did so with a heavy heart. He carried with him gifts from his new friends, a blade forged by Sharn, a pouch of Buzruga's healing herbs, a garland of dried wildflowers from Gorbash's mother. More than these, he carried the memory of friendship forged in the fires of understanding and trust. As he passed through the gates of Orsinium, Alan turned back for a final look at the city. He saw the lanterns glowing in the dusk, the smoke rising from the hearths, the gentle giants moving through the streets with purpose and pride. He knew that he would return, and that when he did, he would be welcomed not as a stranger, but as a friend. And so, the forging of friendship became another story woven into the tapestry of Orsinium. A story not of conquest or defeat, but of hope and renewal, of bridges built where walls once stood. It was a story told around the hearth, in the gardens, by the river, and in the quiet moments of the night, a reminder that even in a world scarred by conflict and loss, the gentle giants of Orsinium could choose to open their hearts and build something lasting, beautiful, and true. The moonless night arrived quietly, as if the stars themselves had paused to witness the transformation of Orsinium. In the days leading to the new moon, anticipation rippled through the city's winding streets and secret gardens. The festival of the new moon was not a celebration of spectacle or grandeur, but a gentle, communal ritual, an evening when the gentle giants of Orsinium set aside their burdens and old grievances, gathering together beneath the velvet sky to renew their bonds and welcome the promise of renewal. Preparations began at dawn. The city's youngest rose early, their laughter echoing as they darted through courtyards to gather wildflowers and aromatic herbs from the gardens. Elders supervised, their hands deftly weaving garlands and wreaths from mountain thyme, lavender, and the delicate bluebells that had become a symbol of hope in Orsinium. The scent of fresh bread and honeyed cakes drifted from the hearths, mingling with the earthy aroma of dew on stone. Throughout the day, Orsimer families worked side by side. The smiths set aside their hammers, the scribes their chisels, the hunters their bows. Even the night watchers, relieved of their usual patrols, joined in the preparations, stringing lanterns of horn and oiled parchment along the city's main avenue and in the hidden alcoves where secret gardens bloomed. Each lantern was painted with symbols of the moon's phases, a silent promise that darkness would always yield to light. As dusk approached, the city's great square filled with a gentle hum of anticipation. Long tables were set beneath the open sky, draped with woven cloths and decorated with garlands. Platters of roasted root vegetables, smoked fish, and sweet pastries were laid out for all to share. There was no distinction between clan or craft, elder or child. On this night, all were kin, united by the simple joy of being together. When the last light of day faded and the sky deepened to indigo, the chief of Orsinium stepped forward. His voice, rich and steady, carried across the square. Tonight, we honor the new moon, not for its darkness, but for the promise it brings. In the absence of light, we find one another. In the quiet, we remember what it is to hope. With these words, the festival began. The lanterns were lit one by one, their soft glow illuminating faces turned upward in wonder. A hush fell as Wrothgar, the wise woman, led the city in a song that had been sung for generations, a melody as old as the mountains, its notes rising and falling like the wind through pine. The words spoke of endings and beginnings, of letting go and starting anew, of the gentle strength that carried the Orsimer through every trial. Children paraded through the square, their hair crowned with garlands, their hands carrying small bowls of water gathered from the river Carth. At the signal, they scattered the water over the stones, a blessing for the city and its people, a wish for peace in the days to come. Laughter and applause followed, the sound warm and bright against the hush of the night. As the meal was shared, stories flowed as freely as the honeyed mead. Gorbash sat with Alan, the Breton merchant who had become a friend, and together they listened as elders recounted tales of past festivals, of years when the city had been little more than a dream, of nights spent in exile, of the first new moon after Orsinium's rebirth. Each story was a thread in the tapestry of memory, binding the present to the past, the living to those who had come before. Later, as the feast gave way to music, Sharn Gromak produced a drum carved from mountain oak and began a slow, steady rhythm. Others joined with flutes and lyres, their melodies weaving through the night air. Couples danced in the lantern light, their movements graceful and unhurried, while children spun in dizzying circles, their laughter rising to meet the stars. In a quiet corner, Wrothgar gathered those who carried sorrow in their hearts. She spoke softly, her words a balm, reminding them that the new moon was a time for release, for letting go of grief and regret, for making room for hope. She handed each a sprig of rosemary, instructing them to cast it into the communal fire as a symbol of their burdens left behind. The flames flared and crackled, sending sparks skyward, and with them, the prayers of the gentle giants. As midnight approached, the music softened and the city grew still. The chief led the people to the highest point within the walls, where the view stretched out across the moonlit valleys and the distant glimmer of the river Carth. There, in the silence, each person made a private wish for the coming month, a hope for healing, for forgiveness, for love. The wishes were unspoken, but their power was felt in the gentle hush that settled over Orsinium. One by one, the lanterns were extinguished, their light replaced by the soft glow of starlight. The city, wrapped in darkness, felt not empty but full of memory, of hope, of the quiet strength that had carried the Orsimer through every hardship. Families returned to their homes, hearts lightened, burdens eased, the bonds between them renewed. Gorbash lingered in the square, watching as the last lantern flickered out. He thought of the stories told, the friendships forged, the sorrows released. He understood, as all gentle giants did, that the festival of the new moon was not just a celebration, but a promise that no matter how dark the night, the people of Orsinium would always find their way back to one another, guided by the memory of what they had endured and the hope of what was yet to come. And so, beneath the silent sky, Orsinium slept, its dreams bright with the promise of renewal, its gentle giants at peace beneath the watchful gaze of the stars. The festival of the new moon had left Orsinium wrapped in a hush of contentment, the city stones still warm from the laughter and music of the night before. Now, as the sun rose over the Wrothgarian peaks, the gentle giants of Orsinium prepared for a different kind of gathering, a solemn, ancient ceremony that reached back to the very roots of their people. This was the day of the blessing of Malacath, when the Orsimer would seek the guidance and favor of their patron, the god who had shaped their destiny and watched over them through every trial. The preparations began in silence. At dawn, the city's elders and wise women moved through the streets, lighting incense at doorways and scattering fragrant herbs in the courtyards. The scent of sage and juniper mingled with the crisp mountain air, a gentle summons that called the Orsimer from their homes. Even the youngest children understood the gravity of this day. Their laughter was subdued, their voices hushed as they helped arrange the offerings, simple loaves of bread, bowls of mountain berries, and small tokens of iron or stone, each crafted by hand. At the heart of Orsinium stood the shrine of Malacath, a structure both humble and imposing. Built from the blackest stone quarried from the mountain's depths, its walls were etched with runes that told the story of the Orsimer's beginning, of Trinimac's transformation, of exile and endurance, of a people who had been broken and remade, yet who had never lost their will to hope. The shrine's doors stood open, and within, a great brazier burned with a blue-green flame, a symbol of Malacath's watchful presence. The city gathered in the square before the shrine. Gorbash stood with his family, his heart beating with anticipation and reverence. He remembered the stories his father had told him as a child, of Malacath's strength and sorrow, of the gods' promise to his people that they would never be truly forsaken. Around him, neighbors and friends bowed their heads, each carrying their own memories, their own prayers for the blessing to come. The ceremony began with the sound of a horn, its note low and mournful, echoing off the mountain walls. Bezruga, the wise woman, stepped forward, her arms raised in invocation. Her voice, steady and clear, carried across the square. Great Malacath, Father of our exile, hear the voices of your children. We come not in pride, but in humility. We come not to ask for vengeance, but for wisdom to endure, to forgive, to build anew. One by one, the people approached the shrine, laying their offerings at the foot of the brazier. Some left tokens of their craft, a finely wrought blade, a carved wooden bowl, a garland of wildflowers. Others brought stones from the river, each smoothed by the current and marked with the name of a loved one lost. Gorbash placed a simple iron ring, forged in his family's hearth, on the altar. It was a symbol of unity, of the unbroken circle that bound his kin to the city, and the city to the god who watched over them. As the offerings mounted, the air grew thick with the scent of burning herbs and the quiet murmur of prayers. The elders recited the ancient tales of Malacath's exile from the Edra, of his promise to the Orsimer that their suffering would not be in vain. We are the children of the broken God, they intoned, and in our brokenness, we find strength. In our sorrow, we find compassion. In our endurance, we find hope. The most sacred part of the ceremony followed, the blessing itself. Bezruga took up a bowl of water drawn from the river Karth, its surface shimmering with the faintest trace of blue-green, as if touched by the god's own hand. She dipped a sprig of mountain sage into the water and moved among the people, sprinkling each with a few drops. Malacath's blessing upon you, she whispered, her words a balm for old wounds. May you endure, may you forgive, may you find peace. The blessing was not a promise of ease or victory. The Orsimer knew, as their god did, that life would always bring hardship. But in the touch of the water, in the scent of the sage, in the warmth of the brazier's flame, they felt a quiet reassurance, a reminder that they were not alone, that their struggles were seen and honored, that even in exile, they belonged to something greater than themselves. After the ritual, the city did not erupt in celebration. Instead, the people lingered in the square, speaking softly, sharing memories and hopes. Some wept, releasing grief that had lain heavy on their hearts. Others embraced, forgiving old slights and renewing bonds of friendship. The blessing of Malacath was a time for healing, for setting aside the burdens of anger and resentment, for opening the heart to the possibility of peace. As the sun climbed higher, the city slowly returned to its daily rhythm. Yet the spirit of the blessing lingered, woven into every gesture of kindness, every act of patience, every moment of quiet strength. Gorbash felt it as he walked through the streets, a gentleness in the way neighbors greeted one another, a lightness in the laughter of children, a sense of unity that ran deeper than blood or stone. In the evening, as the shadows lengthened and the mountains glowed with the last light of day, the people of Orsinium gathered once more around their hearths. They shared simple meals, sang old songs, and told stories of Malacath's blessing of the god who had turned exile into endurance, sorrow into strength, and brokenness into beauty. And so, in the quiet heart of the mountains, The gentle giants of Orsinium carried the blessing of Malacath with them, not as a shield against suffering, but as a promise that they would endure, forgive, and build anew together. After the blessing of Malacath, Orsinium settled into a rare and sacred stillness. The city stone walls, usually alive with the bustle of daily life, seemed to breathe in unison with the mountains themselves. As dusk deepened, the gentle giants of Orsinium retreated from the squares and gardens, their hearts full from the day's solemn rituals. It was a time for inward turning, for the kind of reflection that could only be found in the hush of night, beneath the watchful gaze of ancient peaks and distant stars. Gorbash felt the pull of this quiet. As the last embers of the communal fires faded and families withdrew into their homes, he found himself drawn upward, toward the city's highest tower. The climb was slow and thoughtful, each step echoing softly against the old stone. He passed shuttered windows and sleeping courtyards, the city's usual sounds replaced by the gentle sigh of wind and the distant, steady rush of the river Karth. At the summit, the world opened wide. Orsinium lay below him, its rooftops silvered by moonlight, its walls standing strong and serene. Beyond, the Wrothgarian Mountains stretched into darkness, their snowy crowns glowing faintly, eternal and unchanging. The sky was clear, a tapestry of stars so thick and bright that it seemed the heavens themselves had drawn closer for this night of reflection. Gorbash settled on the cold stone, his cloak wrapped tightly around his broad shoulders. He gazed out over the city, his thoughts drifting like the mountain mists. The rituals of the day replayed in his mind, the scent of sage and juniper, the touch of cool water on his brow, the words of Bazruga echoing in his heart. He thought of the offerings piled at Malacath's shrine, tokens of hope, sorrow, forgiveness, and of the quiet strength that bound his people together. Below, Orsinium slept. Yet in many homes, candles still burned low, their soft light illuminating faces deep in thought. The night of quiet reflection was not a time for grand gestures or public declarations. Instead, it was a time for each Orsimer to look inward, to honor the memories that shaped them, to consider the paths that lay ahead. Some wrote in journals, their careful script capturing the lessons and dreams of the year gone by. Others sat in silent prayer, their hands folded, their eyes closed, seeking guidance in the stillness. In the secret gardens, elders wandered the shadowed paths, touching leaves and stones, recalling the loved ones whose memories lingered there. In the library, Borbal Giareasgash sat alone among the stone tablets, her fingers tracing the ancient runes, her mind drifting through the centuries of Orsinium's history. She remembered chiefs and wise women, lost cities and new beginnings, each story a thread in the tapestry of their people. Gorbash's own thoughts turned to his family. He remembered his grandfather's stories, his mother's gentle wisdom, his father's steady hands. He thought of the friends he had lost, the hardships endured, the moments of laughter and joy that had carried him through. He felt gratitude for the city that had sheltered him, for the mountains that had shaped him, for the God who had blessed him with endurance and hope. As the night deepened, the city's silence grew profound. Even the river Karth seemed to hush its song, as if listening to the dreams of those who slept nearby. The mountains stood sentinel, their presence a comfort and a challenge, to endure, to forgive, to build anew. In this hush, Gorbash found clarity. He understood that the strength of Orsinium was not in its walls or weapons, but in the hearts of its people, in their willingness to reflect, to learn, to change. The night of quiet reflection was a gift, a chance to set down burdens, to forgive old wounds, to imagine a future shaped by kindness and courage. He closed his eyes, letting the peace of the mountains fill him. He made a silent promise to honor the past, to cherish the present, to greet the future with open hands. Around him, the gentle giants of Orsinium dreamed their own dreams, each one a part of the city's enduring spirit. And so, beneath the stars, Orsinium rested. The night of quiet reflection passed in silence and hope, the city's heart beating steady and true, ready to wake with the dawn and begin again. The dawn after the night of quiet reflection broke with a gentle hush, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Orsinium's rooftops glimmered with dew, and the city's people moved softly through the streets, their hearts still echoing with the peace and clarity found in the silent hours. It was on such a morning that the city's gates creaked open to a sight that would be spoken of for generations: the return of the exiles. Word spread quickly. A group of Orsimer, weary and travel-stained, stood at the threshold of their old home. Some had left in anger, others in sorrow, driven away by old wounds, misunderstandings, or the restless urge to seek a new beginning beyond the mountains. For years they had wandered, making homes in distant cities, finding work as mercenaries, artisans, or laborers in lands that did not always welcome them. Yet the memory of Orsinium, of the hearth fires and the mountain's embrace, had never faded from their hearts. The first to step forward was a woman with silver-flecked hair, her eyes bright with hope and fear. She carried little: a battered pack, a walking staff, and a stone from the river Carth, polished smooth by years of travel. Behind her came others: a smith with calloused hands, a healer with a pouch of dried herbs, a young family with a child who had never seen the city of their ancestors. Their faces were marked by hardship, but also by a quiet strength born of survival and longing. The city's guards, surprised but not unkind, greeted them with cautious curiosity. There was a moment of silence as the exiles and those who had remained regarded one another, the weight of old history pressing between them. But then Bezruga, the wise woman, stepped forward from the gathering crowd. She opened her arms and spoke with the authority of memory and compassion. No Orsimer is ever truly lost. All who seek peace and home are welcome within these walls. With those words, the tension eased. The gates swung wide, and the exiles entered Orsinium, not as strangers or supplicants, but as kin returned. The city's people came forward, offering bread and water, blankets and warm greetings. Some embraced old friends with tears in their eyes. Others stood quietly, watching as the circle of their community widened to include those who had once been absent. Gorbash was among the first to greet the newcomers. He recognized the smith, who had taught him as a boy to temper iron with patience. He remembered the healer's gentle hands, the laughter of the woman who had once sung at every festival. Now, reunited, the shared stories of distant lands and lost years, of hardship endured and lessons learned. The exile spoke of the kindness of strangers, the cruelty of prejudice, the longing for a place where they could simply belong. The city responded with open arms. Homes were made ready, gardens shared, and the communal hearth burned brighter that night than it had in many seasons. The exiles brought new skills and stories, new songs and recipes, new hopes that mingled with the old. Children who had never met before played together in the squares, their laughter weaving a new tapestry of memory and possibility. There were, of course, moments of awkwardness, old grievances that needed to be spoken, misunderstandings that required patience and forgiveness. Yet the spirit of the city, shaped by the wisdom of Malacath and the lessons of the lost chief, prevailed. Elders reminded all that Orsinium had always been a place of return, a city rebuilt not just in stone, but in the hearts of those who chose to call it home. That evening, a special meal was prepared in the main square. The exiles were invited to share the stories of their journeys, tales of distant cities, of battles fought and friendships forged, of the longing that had brought them back to the shadow of the mountains. As the stars emerged overhead, the city listened, and in the telling, the distance between exile and home shrank until it disappeared altogether. Bezruga led a quiet ritual at the hearth, placing the river Carth stone brought by the first exile into the circle of remembrance. "Let the stone remind us," she said, "that the river always finds its way home, and so do we." The flames flickered, casting light on faces both familiar and new, and in that moment, the city felt whole. The return of the exiles did more than fill empty houses or reunite old friends. It renewed Orsinium's spirit, reminding all who lived there that home was not a matter of walls or blood, but of welcome and forgiveness. The gentle giants of the city, shaped by hardship and hope, found new strength in the embrace of those who had wandered and returned. And so, as the night deepened and the city settled into peaceful sleep, Orsinium stood as it always had, open to all who sought belonging, its legacy renewed with every return, every forgiveness, every story shared by the hearth. The long winter in the Wrothgarian Mountains had always been a test of patience and resilience for the gentle giants of Orsinium. Snow lingered in the shadowed valleys, and the wind, though less biting now, still carried the memory of frost. But as the days grew longer and the first hints of warmth crept into the stone, a subtle transformation began to ripple through the city, a quiet, persistent promise that spring was near. It started with the river. The Carth, swollen with meltwater, sang a new song as it rushed past Orsinium's walls, its banks alive with the chatter of birds returning from distant lands. The ice that had rimed the stones for months cracked and slipped away, revealing the dark, fertile earth beneath. Children, restless from months indoors, gathered at the water's edge to watch the current and search for the first green shoots that would soon push through the mud. In the secret gardens, the earliest flowers dared to bloom. Crocuses and snowdrops, stubborn and bright, opened their petals to the pale sun. Elders and children alike knelt in the softening earth, their hands gentle as they coaxed life from the soil. Each new sprout was greeted with quiet celebration, a sign that the world was waking, that the cycle of hardship and renewal would continue as it always had. Gorbash felt the change in his bones. Each morning, he rose with the sun and walked the city's ramparts, breathing in the crisp air and watching the mountains shed their white cloaks. He saw neighbors repairing fences, sweeping away the last of the winter's debris, and preparing the fields for planting. There was a sense of anticipation in every gesture, a collective breath held in hope. The return of the exiles had brought new energy to Orsinium, and as spring approached, that energy blossomed into action. The newcomers shared seeds from distant lands, their stories mingling with those of the city's oldest families. Together, they planned the planting of new gardens, the rebuilding of terraces, the restoration of paths lost to snow and time. The promise of spring was not just in the earth, but in the hearts of the people, an unspoken agreement to begin again, to grow together. The Festival of Renewal, held at the first full moon of spring, was a time for both remembrance and hope. On the morning of the festival, the city awoke to the sound of drums and laughter. Garlands of wildflowers hung from every doorway, and the air was sweet with the scent of fresh bread and honey. Families gathered in the main square, bringing with them baskets of seeds, saplings, and the first fruits of the season. Buzzruga, the wise woman, led the opening ceremony. She stood beneath the ancient oak at the center of the square, her arms raised in welcome. "Winter has tested us," she intoned, her voice strong and warm, "but spring rewards our patience. Let us plant not only seeds, but hopes. Let us water not only the earth, but our bonds with one another." One by one, the people of Orsinium came forward, each placing a handful of seeds in the communal garden. Children pressed their palms into the soil, giggling as worms wriggled beneath their fingers. Elders whispered blessings over the sprouts, recalling the gardens of their youth and the promise of harvests yet to come. The exiles, too, knelt in the earth, their faces alight with gratitude and belonging. As the day unfolded, the city was transformed. Musicians played in the streets, their psalms weaving through the alleys and over the rooftops. Dancers spun in circles, their feet kicking up clouds of dust and laughter. The scent of roasting meat mingled with the perfume of blooming flowers, and everywhere there was the sense of a burden lifted, a new beginning embraced. Gorbash spent the afternoon helping to repair the old irrigation channels, his hands muddy and his heart light. He worked alongside Alain, the Breton friend who had chosen to stay in Orsinium, and together they joked and sang as they guided the water to the thirsty roots of the new plantings. In their laughter, in the easy camaraderie of shared labor, Gorbash felt the true meaning of spring, a season not just of growth, but of forgiveness and unity. As evening fell, the city gathered for a feast beneath the stars. Tables overflowed with food, fresh greens, smoked fish, sweet cakes, and the last stores of winter's preserves. Stories were told, toasts were made, and the children, exhausted from a day of celebration, fell asleep in their parents' arms. Bazruga closed the festival with a simple blessing. May what we plant today feed us in the days to come. May what we forgive today bring us peace. May what we hope today become our harvest. That night, as Gorbash walked home through the quiet streets, he paused to look back at the city. Lanterns glowed in every window, and the scent of earth and flowers drifted on the breeze. He thought of the long winter, of the hardships endured, of the friends lost and found. And he knew, as every Orsimer did, that spring's true promise was not in the flowers or the warmth, but in the willingness to begin again, to nurture what was fragile, to trust in the cycles of the world, and to greet each new day with hope. And so, beneath the watchful mountains and the endless sky, Orsinium bloomed. The gentle giants, shaped by hardship and hope, stepped forward into the promise of spring, ready to build, to forgive, to grow, and to dream once more. Spring's promise lingered in the air, and Orsinium's gentle giants found themselves drawn ever closer to the mountains that had shaped their lives. The Wrothgarian peaks, ancient and enduring, rose in silent majesty above the city, their snowy crowns gleaming in the morning light. For the Orsimer, the mountains were more than a backdrop. They were guardians, teachers, and kin, their presence woven into every story, every ritual, every quiet moment of belonging. As the days grew warmer, the city's people ventured beyond their walls with renewed purpose. Paths once buried beneath drifts of snow now wound through meadows dotted with wildflowers and up into the rocky foothills, where the air was crisp and the world seemed to open wide. Gorbash, like many others, felt the call of the heights. With friends and family, he set out on a pilgrimage that was as old as Orsinium itself, a journey not of conquest, but of communion. The climb was slow and deliberate, each step a meditation. They paused often to rest and to marvel at the world unfolding below. The city's rooftops clustered like river stones, the silver ribbon of the Karth winding through the valley, the patchwork of gardens and fields that spoke of generations of patient labor. The wind carried the scent of pine and thawing earth, and the distant cry of an eagle echoed from peak to peak. Along the way, the Orsimer honored the mountain in small, reverent ways. Children placed garlands of bluebells on ancient cairns. Elders whispered prayers at springs where the water ran clear and cold. Bazruga, wise woman and healer, gathered rare herbs from sheltered ledges, her fingers gentle as she thanked the land for its gifts. Sharn Gromak, the smith, paused to examine veins of or exposed by the melting snow. His practiced eye seeing not just metal, but the promise of future tools and artistry. At midday, the pilgrims reached a plateau where the world seemed to pause. Here, the mountains pressed close, their shadows cool and comforting. The Orsimer shared a simple meal, bread, cheese, dried fruit, and sat in a circle, their conversation soft and full of laughter. They spoke of the year's hardships and hopes, of the return of the exiles, of new friendships and old wounds healed. The mountains listened, silent and steadfast, their presence a balm for restless hearts. In the hush that followed, Gorbash wandered to the edge of the plateau. He gazed out across the endless ridges, his thoughts drifting like the clouds that cast shifting patterns on the land below. He remembered the stories his grandmother had told, of the lost chief who vanished into these very peaks, of ancestors who found shelter in hidden valleys, of the promise that no Orsimer was ever truly alone while the mountains stood. The others joined him, and together they sang an old song, a melody that rose and fell with the wind, carrying words of gratitude and belonging. The psalm spoke of stone and snow, of hardship and endurance, of the quiet joy found in simply being part of something greater than oneself. Their voices blended with the mountain's own music, the rush of distant streams, the whisper of wind in the pines, the steady heartbeat of the earth. As the sun began its slow descent, the group made their way back toward Orsinium. The journey down was lighter, their burdens eased by the mountain's embrace. They carried with them small tokens, smooth stones, fragrant sprigs of wild thyme, memories of laughter and shared silence. Each step was a reminder that the mountains were not a barrier, but a home, not a place to conquer, but a source of wisdom and strength. That evening, as the city gathered once more around its hearths, the stories of the day were shared. Children recounted their adventures, elders offered blessings, and the gentle giants of Orsinium felt the deep, abiding peace that came from knowing they belonged. The mountains, ageless and unyielding, watched over them, their presence a silent promise that whatever storms might come, Orsinium would endure. In the embrace of the mountains, the Orsimer found more than shelter. They found themselves. Their city, their kinship, their hope, all were rooted in the stone and sky, in the patient, enduring strength of the land they called home. And so, as night fell and the stars kindled above the peaks, Orsinium slept in quiet certainty, its gentle giants dreaming of new beginnings, their hearts forever held in the embrace of the mountains.